Hey everybody, welcome back to your desks where we will take a look at the next portion of the Jacksonian era, which is called the market revolution. What is the market revolution? Well, it is a time in which the economy of the United States begins to make a shift away from agriculture and agriculture-based subsistence living and enter the wider world of market capitalism and, to some degree, industrial capitalism. Now, that is going to have different effects on both the North and the South. It's going to have different effects on poor people and rich people, and it's going to have different effects on how people view things such as gender and the family. So let's jump right into it and start talking about the market revolution. We're going to begin with something called the American system. That familiar face below the text, that is Senator Henry Clay. You may remember him as one of the chief war hawks at the outset of the War of 1812. He hasn't gone away, and he's got some pretty big ideas for the future of the nation. Let's start talking about that. So let's consider the War of 1812 and why we lost the War of 1812. Now, you can say, Mr. Gillespie, we didn't lose the War of 1812, we just didn't win. Okay, fair enough. I'm looking at the Treaty of Ghent, and I see that none of the war aims were met, none of the objectives for which we sought have been achieved, and I'm going to call that a loss. Why did we lose? Well, not everybody's heart was in the war. Remember the New England Federalists, the Hartford Convention, and that threat of secession? That is not going to be good toward uniting a population. So not everybody's heart was in the War of 1812. Also, remember Napoleon's defeat, which the significance was 10,000 crack troops are able to be moved from Europe to the North American theater and provide quite a headache for James Madison. And then don't forget, we went into this war terribly unprepared, believing that England would be tied up in Europe. We have no army and we have almost no navy and are unable to really fight this war. Like we said, Thomas Jefferson, no standing army. Those Democratic Republicans believed that a standing army was a threat to freedom. It was a threat to individual and state freedom. And so Thomas Jefferson says, we're not going to have a standing army. James Madison, entering the presidency after Jefferson, continued that tradition, believing that the states could provide the necessary armed forces should we need to go to war. Also, small government means no public finance. We are not going to be able to pull together the necessary resources to fight this war. We cannot tax the states. We cannot demand this. And so we're not going to have a financial system that is capable of sustaining a major war. And so we look at these reasons. A lot of people in Congress look at these reasons, and they look at the no Navy, no Army, and no strong system of public finance. And who do you blame? You blame the party that is most associated with these things. You blame the Democratic Republicans. And you say, Thomas Jefferson, you and your small your small government, all power to the states kind of system, that was not very beneficial. That was not a way that we can pull together and win this war. So remember, Thomas Jefferson says, the government that governs best governs least. And James Madison seemingly learned that lesson, and he says, well, that's all well and good unless you're at war. And James Madison is going to make some changes. He says we should have a standing army. We should have a military. And so we're going to have now a standing army of 10,000 men. That's not a huge army by, say, European standards, Prussian standards, but it's a step toward a more consolidated government for us. Standing army of 10,000 men, $1 million annually for a new Navy, so we're going to be talking about increasing the budget, and we're going to raise property taxes to pay for all this. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing the beginnings of something of a military-industrial complex, something of private industry joining hands with the military so that we can keep a standing army in case we need to go to war again. Back to Henry Clay. Henry Clay is going to propose in Congress a series of bills, a series of measures that are all united under something called the American system. This is what he calls it, the American system. Now, at this time, you don't have Federalists anymore. There really is not a big Federalist presence because of the Hartford Convention and the way they look like a bunch of traitors, so no one wants to call themselves a Federalist. We're all Republicans now, but within that Republican Party, you still have the same ongoing fight and conversation about the role of the states versus the role of the federal government. So the American system is also known as Neo-federalism. Now, historians call it that, Neo-federalism. No one would walk around in the year 1816, 1817 going, well, I'm a Neo-federalist. But they would have generally advocated for some of the old Federalist programs. So what is the American system? Let's look. First off, the American system wants to raise the tariff. 20-25% tariff on imports, a tax on imports. That's really big. What's the purpose of it? The purpose of any tariff is to protect American manufacturing, and so it doesn't have to compete with foreign imports by making foreign imports more expensive. Now remember, this was Hamilton's original idea, and Jefferson opposed it, believing that this would serve American manufacturers. He didn't like that. Now, Madison had let that bank expire. Remember, he's a good Jeffersonian. He had let that National Bank of the United States expire in 1811. Now Henry Clay says, let's bring it back. The purpose of a national bank is to give us a unified a unified system of commerce, of banking, and a unified currency. Now, if we can do this, we can quickly fund a war effort if we need to, and we do not need to get ourselves all concerned with rates of exchange between the states. So, part of the proposal for the American system is a rechartered American bank. Now, how about this one? Federal. Keep your eye on that word. Federal. Big government. Big government spending for things such as roads, canals, and shipping. These we call internal improvements to improve the infrastructure of the United States, and thereby the purpose being increase economic activity. You see, if merchants can get things from one place to another by a road, by a canal, then that will increase demand, and it will drop prices, and everybody will be happy. And so part of the American system says that the federal government should take an active role in facilitating commerce. Now, you're thinking Democratic Republicans are probably pooping their pants right now, because these are all the things that Jefferson and his group had originally opposed. They say this is government exercising powers that it should not exercise. And they would point to the Constitution and they would say, where is this in the Constitution? Now, lastly, this goes along with the bank, the idea of a single national currency. The purpose is, again, to make trade among the states much easier, to make commerce from one state to another flow without worrying about exchange rates and tax rates and things like that. So uniting the nation in a national currency is one way to bring everybody together. So why do we call this neo-federalism, you ask? Well, which of these things would Jefferson approve of? I don't think any of them. But nevertheless, this is being proposed by Well, supposedly by his party, the Republicans. But as you can see, the Republicans have changed their tune on a lot of these programs. Now, remember John C. Calhoun. John C. Calhoun was, with Henry Clay, a war hawk. John C. Calhoun is going to become one of the chief advocates of states' rights. Well, here in 1817, he's also a really big proponent of the American system. He writes, "Let it not be forgotten, let it be forever kept in mind, that the extent of the Republic exposes us to the greatest of calamities, disunion." That is, the North and the South could go different directions and fly apart. "We are great and rapidly growing. This is our price and danger, our weakness and our strength. We are under the most imperious obligations to counteract every tendency to," and there's that word again, disunion. "Whatever impedes the intercourse of the extremes with this, the center of the Republic, weakens the Union. Let us then bind the Republic together with a perfect system of roads and canals. Let us conquer space." So as you can see, John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, he is a big proponent of this American system. Bind the Republic together. North, South, East, West. Let's tie them together commercially. Let's tie them together financially. Let's bring the nation together under this American system. Now you might ask, where are the old Democratic Republicans? Where is the old anti-federalist spirit? Doesn't anyone have a problem with any of this? Well, in fact, people do. And they point to the Constitution as strict constructionists usually do. And they go right to the Commerce Clause. Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the several states and promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. Now, that Commerce Clause is another one of those slippery slopes. It's another one of those portions of the Constitution where its meaning tends to depend on who's interpreting it. Congress shall have the power to regulate. What does that mean, regulate? What meaning do we impose on regulate? And promote the progress of science and useful arts. Okay. Now, a federalist would look at that and go, see, Congress can fund roads and canals, and Congress can tax the states and raise property taxes so that this can be paid for. And the anti-federalists, the old Jeffersonian Democrats, would look at that and they'd say, wait, no. By securing limited times to authors and inventors, that's talking about patent rights. So, again, you can kind of see that when James Madison was writing these words, he had the arguments of both big government people and small government people in there, and he's trying to, well, steer a middle course. Well, remember James Madison? He can only take his new federalism so far. James Madison is going to oppose portions of the American system. And one of those is what's called the bonus bill, which was money for exactly what we've been talking about, internal improvements in the West, canals and roads. And James Madison has finally had enough. He says, okay, I can increase the army, but when it comes to the federal government building these things, he draws the line. Let's look at what he says. The legislative powers vested in Congress are specified and enumerated in the Constitution. See, he's pointing back to the Commerce Clause. And it does not appear that the power proposed to be exercised by the bill is among the enumerated powers. And he quotes it. The power to regulate commerce among the several states cannot include a power to construct roads and canals and to improve the navigation of watercourses in order to facilitate, promote, and secure such commerce without a latitude of construction departing from the ordinary import of the terms strengthened by the known inconveniences, which doubtless led to the grant of this remedial power in Congress. So, no, we're not going to put federal money toward the building of these roads and canals in the West. You might ask, he signed other parts like the tariff and the bank and the national currency, and what's the difference here? He really just feels that things have gone too far, that we're straying from the original purpose of the revolution, and he does not like how big government is coming, how big government has become under his own administration, and he wants to put the brakes on it. Now, let's take a look again at the political parties, at the development of the political parties that we've been following. You've got Hamiltonians and Jeffersonians who first cut their teeth over the Constitution. The Jeffersonians, no, I don't want the Constitution. The Hamiltonians, yeah, I do. Hamiltonians become the Federalists. Jeffersonians become the Anti-Federalists. Jeffersonians then become the Democratic Republicans. And then this era that we are in right now, it is known as the era of good feelings. Everybody's a Republican because it's no longer cool to be a Federalist. But everybody's a Republican. But as you can see, this American system divides the Republicans, and those who favor it become the national Republicans. And those who don't, well, where are they going to go? That's an issue that we'll pick up. Now, looking at another side of this, the transportation revolution. We're talking about the consequences of a lot of this federal money into things like trains and canals and boats and stuff like that. One way to view the transportation revolution, and probably the best way to view it, is through the expanse of the railroads. Railroads are a European invention in the late 18th century, and they are beginning to be implemented by the 1820s and 1830s in the United States. As you can see, very few of them in 1830. As we keep going, they are starting to be represented by the little red lines there, and pretty good distribution between north and south in 1840. Look at what begins to happen by 1850. The majority of your railroads, and take a look at also your canals, are in the north, whereas it looks like the south is lagging. Once again, there are the railroads. Again, the south has railroads. Look at the north. The north has more, telling you something about the uneven distribution of technology and commercial enterprises going on between the north and the south. Take a look at what's happening to travel time between 1800 and 1857, a journey that would would take you in 1800 days or weeks is now you're able to complete that journey in hours. This, of course, meaning that goods, services, and ideas are going to travel faster as well. And we really need to dramatize this. If we look at where the white-hot center of the transportation revolution is happening, it is happening really between New York and the Great Lakes with the construction of the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal, as you can see, is going to link New York City, a major eastern hub, with the Great Lakes region. What this is going to do is it's going to link the east and the west. Now, the Erie Canal is the biggest construction project in the West, anyway, since the Roman Empire. Now, if you just think about some of the major construction projects undertaken by the Roman Empire, and then you realize that they've not been accomplished since then, this really helps put things in perspective. Like as we said, this is going to connect New York City with its port on the Atlantic Ocean with the Great Lakes. So the eastern part of the country with the western part of the country. The mastermind behind it is the New York governor, DeWitt Clinton. He wanted to be president, but it never worked out for him, so he spent 20 years as the governor of New York. Now, his big life's ambition is to do exactly what he did. Make New York City the commercial hub of the entire country, really, but especially of the North. He was criticized for this because he has in mind something that has never been done and to many people's understanding can never be done. They called it the Big Ditch, his proposed canal, the Big Ditch. It did take him 8 years and an investment of $7 million, this through both private investors and local taxes. And it opens up in 1825 and is an instant success. $15 million are going to flow through its channels annually, and this is going to drop prices by up to 95% if you think things can get to where they need to go faster and more efficiently. Demand is going to increase, but also just the travel time involved in getting things there is going to decrease, which is going to bring prices down. Some of the towns that are going to really owe their existence to the Erie Canal, Buffalo, Syracuse, and Rochester, those are going to become boom towns as a result of the Erie Canal. And New York City itself is going to quadruple in size, making it essentially that financial and commercial and cultural hub that we know it today, New York City. Just to put these statistics in front of you, look at what happens to shipping costs between 1785 and 1865. Put your eye on where the Erie Canal is completed, and you can see the major drop-off happens after this canal building project is completed. Again, this helps to put things in perspective. The majority of the development is where? It's in the north. The majority of your major rail lines are going to be in the north. The majority of your major canals are going to be in the north. This is going to play a part in the development of both North and South. And you might be asking, how come the South is not developing at the rate of the North? It's not that the South is being unsuccessful. It's not that the South is lagging behind in any way that they find to be important. The South is being successful in another way. And that would be in the cotton growing regions. Let's look at the other agricultural revolution. We start with a guy named Eli Whitney. He's a Yankee inventor. He's from Connecticut. Eli Whitney would love to make a mark for himself as an inventor, and he tries and he tries and he tries, and many of his inventions don't go anywhere until right before the War of 1812 he hits on an idea called the system of interchangeable parts. In fact, this is what it's going to become known as. What Eli Whitney hit upon is the idea that I can use one part of a machine in another part of a machine, and that way if the machine breaks, I don't have to throw the whole thing away. I can just go and replace that part. And he first tries that out on guns and becomes a successful manufacturer of firearms for the United States during the War of 1812. Now, the consequences are going to be very different for North and for South. For the South, he hits upon a runaway fantastic invention, and I mean fantastic in the sense that it was very impressive, called the cotton gin. Now, what the cotton gin is going to do, as we're going to see in a little bit, is it's going to make the production of cotton, the processing of cotton, much more efficient. And he invents this in 1793 and files his patent in 1794. And I'm going to save the major story for a few slides away, but you're going to see that the cotton gin is going to result in an increase in the demand for slaves and for land. Now, the system of interchangeable parts also has an impact on the North in the development of the factory system. Eli Whitney's idea takes hold in cotton processing plants. Not growing, but in the processing of it. The South is going to grow it, and the North is going to process it and spin it into textiles. And the machines that are going to do this are based on the principle of interchangeable parts. And so that's going to give rise, again, we'll save the major story for later, but to something called wage slaves coming up. take a look at some of the other major inventions that impacted the North and the South, such as mass-produced guns, thank you to Eli Whitney, the sewing machine, 1846, and the telegraph. All are going to be made available through Eli Whitney's system of interchangeable parts. And to dramatize how fast this is catching on, look at the number of patents filed, just 306 in the year 1800, and that jumps to 28,000 patents by 1860, just to give you an idea of how the idea is catching on, how commerce is catching on, and how this system of Yankee ingenuity, is what they call it in England, is really starting to take over. One way that you see is through the steel plow. John Deere, you may know his name today. They're still making agricultural products today. The steel plow is going to work better than a wooden plow because it's going to make sod busting, make the breaking up of soil easier, so you can have more arable land in a shorter amount of time. Also, Cyrus McCormick invents the reaper mower in 1831. What this is going to do is it's going to mechanize the process by which crops are harvested, and you're going to go from 2 acres harvested a day by hand, that's going to jump to 12 acres a day. And you might think, what is the economic result of these time-saving devices? The result is we need more land, Western settlement. And look, it's both North and South that are going to be pushing west. Yes, the North is going to be pushing with more and more people. The South is going to be pushing, but they're going to demand a lot of land for cotton cultivation. Now, I told you we would talk about this other agricultural revolution. Turning to the South. The southern states discover that they can grow cotton, and this is going to replace the major cash crop, which is tobacco. Tobacco is really hard on the soil, and we're not going to be able to sustain prices that way. But when cotton enters the picture, the southern states really decide that they can do this. It's valuable, but in the early days it's very labor intensive. With one person working, you can only produce a pound a day, and so that makes its planting, its cultivation, not entirely profitable. If we could speed up this process, yes, it would be. But as we said, Eli Whitney files his patent in 1794, and this changes everything. When the cotton gin hits the South, everything is going to be revolutionized overnight. Now one man, and that man will most typically be a slave, he will be able to process 50 times the cotton that he could process before Eli Whitney's cotton gin. So by 1830, the South is producing 1/2 of the world's supply, which by any measure is a tremendous share of the market. If you are controlling 1/2 of the market of anything, you're a success. But by 1850, that grows to 3/4, which is why cotton, by the 1840s, 1850s, cotton is king. Now, there are more millionaires, per capita, that is, in Natchez, Mississippi than anywhere in the world. Now, maybe you're not thinking of Natchez, Mississippi as the home of millionaires, but in the 1840s, 1850s, that is the case because of the tremendous amount of money to be made off of cotton. And the consequences is that this is going to increase the demand for, 1, land. Cotton is also hard on the soil. And 2, slaves. We're going to need more labor to get this cotton cultivation done. And so slavery is going to increase. A lot of people don't know this, but slavery was on its way out, or people thought it was on its way out. Most of Europe had banned it. England had banned slavery since 1833, I believe. But in the United States, once cotton cultivation becomes profitable, it puts the South on the road to becoming the Cotton Kingdom, and that Cotton Kingdom is going to be built on the backs of black slaves. So here's my picture of the United States, and here's how the North is guilty, is implicit, is participating in that growing cotton kingdom as well. So the raw materials are going to be grown in the South, and that's going to be done primarily on the backs of African American or African slaves. Now, the North is going to provide the resources, the technological and the transportation resources to transport that raw cotton north. And then the North is going to do the processing, is going to turn those raw materials into textiles and there sell them both back to the South and sell them to you. So an interesting question arises. Was the United States to England in the 1770s as the North is to the South in the 1820s and 1830s? Sorry, my little Texas is a little anachronistic. Texas does not enter the Union until 1845. But still consider the analogy. Is the South playing a colonial role to the North? Is the South a commercial cash cow, in a sense, to the North? Is the North the one producing the material while the South is the one that's providing the raw material? To an extent, I think that's true. But whereas the mercantilistic policies of England were keeping the United States, the nascent United States, the 13 colonies, from becoming economically wealthy, the South is definitely growing in wealth and status and prestige, even if they are not developing technologically. So now we're going to travel north and look at who's doing a lot of the labor up there. A lot of who's working in factories, certainly in textile factories. A glance at this chart will give you a sense of what's happening, and this is primarily happening in the North. So if you have to think, the South is remaining quite agricultural, and in fact the South is increasingly dependent on agriculture, whereas the North is shifting away from that. This is the nation as a whole, but in 1820 you had 79% of Americans working in agriculture. By 1860, that has dropped 52.9%. Again, look at manufacturing, maybe just under 3% in 1820. By 1860, 13.8, 14% working in manufacturing. This gives you an overall picture of the changing demographics and the changing occupations in the With those changing occupations, as the United States industrializes and becomes more capitalist, what you see is an economic gap that's starting to get wider. In 1800, you had just 10% of all families in the U.S. owning 40% of the nation's wealth. Now, that seems like it's a pretty big distribution, but look at what happens by 1845. Top 10% are owning 50% of the nation's wealth. So, through the onset of the market revolution and the accumulation of capital in big business, you're starting to see that economic gap between the haves and the have-nots grow wider. By 1860, the top 10% of U.S. families are going to own 70% of the nation's wealth. And in New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, the top 10% own 40% of all tangible assets and even more of the liquid assets. At the same time, you're seeing trends in urbanization as well. Look at 1820. You just have 58 towns in the entire United States with more than 2,500 inhabitants. Most of us in 1820 are rural, not city-oriented people, not people working in commerce, people working in agriculture. Look at the jump in 1840. And then, I'm sorry, that should be 1840 to 1860 on the third bullet. You're looking at a jump of 126 towns with close to 2,500 inhabitants. A modest jump there in 20 years. But in 1840, once again, that should be 1860. Look at the number of city dwellers, jumping from 443,000 to 1,844,000 now. The biggest growers, the biggest jumps are going to be in new England, in the textile towns. Let's look at the cause of the. We can draw some conclusions then about the rise of industry and the distribution of wealth. This happens in Europe, this happens in America, this happens whenever you see concentrations of capital, and that is that the gap between the wealthy and the not so wealthy ends up growing. So we should ask, whose American dream is being realized in the 1830s and 1850s? We often speak of that American dream as if we all agree on what it is, but the American dream from the earliest days of the Republic has been a diverse dream and has had to accommodate many different interpretations. Jefferson thought of the United States as a republic of small farmers, Republican with a small r, farmers who lived off the land, who were not interested in commerce, commerce or capitalism or banks. Alexander Hamilton, on the other hand, had another vision. He did have a vision of a growing commercial America in which agriculture was on the decline and commercial interests and capitalism were on the incline. And of course, we can see that Hamilton in the 1830s and 1850s appears to be winning out. But Jefferson's dream of the small farmer, Jefferson's dream of rural country America is still a strong appeal, still has a very strong appeal to many people. Then and now we tend to think that the true America is the rural America. Sometimes we tend to think that the truest Americans are farmers or connected to the land, and that real Americans aren't in cities and, grubbing for commerce and money. People are asking in the 1820s and 1830s, can we have both? Can we have both industry, capitalism, and can we also have that rural American dream? This is Francis Cabot Lowell. Francis Cabot Lowell is an early investor in the textile industry in New England. His vision is, yes, we can accommodate both the Jeffersonian dream and the Hamiltonian dream, and we can do it under one big enterprise. Francis Cabot Lowell travels to England in 1811, and he sees the textiling industry really taking off there. It got started in England first, before America. And he sees the money, he sees the progress, he sees the ingenuity that is coming from new industries and new technologies in cotton spinning. He also sees poverty, exploitation, disease. He sees horrible living conditions in some of the industrial towns like Manchester and Leeds. Now, Francis Cabot Lowell doesn't want to see that in America. He wants his cake and he wants to eat it too. Can we have both? He says, yes, we can. I want to avoid miserable poverty and disease and exploitation, but I still want the money. How am I going to get that? His answer is in what's called the City of Spindles, Lowell, Massachusetts, founded after the man with the vision. It's one of America's very first large-scale commercial textiling industries, textiling factories. And in this City of Spindles in Lowell, Massachusetts, he is going to try, that is, Francis Lowell is going to try to accommodate both the Jeffersonian idealism and the Hamiltonian practicality, and he's going to try to do it with one big project. So something about his City of Spindles, something about his vision and his dream to preserve both. He's going to put it all together in the town named for him, Lowell, Massachusetts, also known as the City of Spindles. Because of his efforts, its population is going to jump from just about 300 to 20,000 in just 15 years. Now, just as Houston is to oil, Lowell, Massachusetts is to textiling. 85% of those who live in Lowell, Massachusetts are going to work in the textile industry. And who are they? The standard employee of Lowell's textile mills is a New England farm girl, some of them as young as 9 years old. New England farm girls, you ask? Why is he interested in employing New England farm girls? Well, for many of these New England farm girls, this is the first time they've earned any money at all. Some of them are going to save it, and some of them are going to send it home to their families. But at once, these mills they're a contradiction of sorts. They are the Jeffersonian idealism, and they're the Hamiltonian practicality. They're offering the girls freedom, but it comes with social restraints. Here you have an ad for the workers that Lowell and some of his imitators are going to put together, and they're going to post these in these New England farm towns. He wants 75 young women, 15 to 35. He doesn't want them too young. He doesn't want them too old. He is interested in employing these young girls. Why? Why? What is this about? I'll tell you what, it's about image. Speaking of image, this is how an artist depicts the Lowell mills. Now, is this what you generally think of? Is this what you usually think of when you think of factories? When you think of industry? When you think of commercial life? Well, this seems to be like a rural scene. This is an idyllic scene. This is a romantic painting. And front and center is not the spinning industry, but a guy on a boat, and trees and green and soft billowy clouds. What's the message here? The message is industry doesn't have to be all black smoke and clouds and grimy people crawling out of mines. Industry can be a pleasant thing as well. Image. Now, this is the cover of what's called the Lowell Offering. The girls who worked in the Lowell mills would put together a magazine of sorts, a periodical to be circulated among the towns. Now, on the one hand, it is an advertisement for the Lowell mills. It is meant to entice more girls into the mills. And on the other hand, it is also a vehicle of self-expression for the girls. So, as I said, the Lowell mills are a contradiction of sorts, but also an accommodation of two visions. Look at this girl in front of us. Look at how she's dressed. She's very healthy looking. She's very clean. She's holding a book, symbol of intelligence, symbol of her ability to use her free time. Look at the beehive to the left. It's a symbol of industry. Look at what's behind her. The Lowell mill is there. The mill is there, but just about at the same length. In the center of the frame is a church spire, and the girls were required to go to church. And then she's walking through this idyllic garden. So on the one hand, we are talking about industry and commerce. On the other hand, there seems to be this suggestion that we're not going to lose the true America. We're not going to lose rural America. We're not going to lose rural Massachusetts, that we can accommodate both visions. And so here's another advertisement that would appear in magazines, or it would appear in the newspapers of the time. There's a Lowell girl. Look, she's dressed very well, and look at what she's holding. A lot of money. Now, behind her is the corporation, the Merrimack. That's the river on which the mills are situated. This is a picture of an independent woman. This is a picture of a woman who's made her own money. And look at what it says below. The pride of the mills. At loom, at the spindle, in parlor, at pen. So ably each station she fills. She's the envy of maidens, the idol of men, as they point to the pride of the mills. This is an image of independent women, of success, of money, of what can become of these girls in the mills. At the same time, we have to consider the actual conditions in the mills. This is a timetable of the Lowell mills. This would be something that they would put up in the mills, and you can see that the girls' lives are more or less governed by the clock. commence work at 6 a.m., leave off work at 6:30 p.m., except Saturday evenings, breakfast 6 a.m., dinner 12, commence work after dinner 12:45. The girl's time is regulated. On the one hand, we have this vision of freedom, of independence. On the other hand, the girl's time and activities are tightly monitored. They are required to go to a Protestant church, not a Catholic church, but a Protestant church. They are required to be they have curfews before certain times. They are required to spend a certain amount of time in some kind of intellectual pursuit, reading poetry or something more suitable. And you say, well, that's not all so bad, but it's interesting that their freedom is being showcased. And so, in a contradictory way, it's no freedom at all, because they really don't have the freedom to do what they would do. They are being put on display. Francis Cabot Lowell, his imitators, and his successors are putting these girls on display to show them, to show the rest of the country how successful they can be, how we can accommodate Jeffersonian idealism with Hamiltonian practicality. Take a look at one of the songs that would appear in the Lowell offering. It's called the Song of the Spinners. The day is o'er, nor longer we toil and spin, for evening's hush withdraws from the daily din. And now wearing with gladsome hearts the theme of the spinner's song, that labor to leisure a zest imparts, unknown to the idle throng. We spin all day, and then in time for rest, sweet peace is found, a joyous and welcome guest. Despite of toil we all agree, or out of the mills or in, dependent on others we'll never be so long as we're able to spin. So there's that clear signal that these girls, these women, these young women are financially independent. That this is a declaration of independence for young girls. But on the other hand, that independence is, well, dependent on the Lowell experience. The Lowell girls went on strike in 1834 because they had their wages lowered, and they didn't want to put up with that. And so you start to see another side of the rhetoric. You start to see another side of the experience. And the document above is not something that would have made it into the Lowell offering. The editors would never have approved of that. But this is a sign that they would have carried around. Oh, isn't it a pity such a pretty girl as I should be sent to the factory to pine away and die? Oh, I cannot be a slave. I will not be a slave. I'm so fond of liberty that I cannot be a slave. It's interesting that they use the word slave in their rhetoric. That word in the 1830s has very strong socio-political baggage. It suggests a lot. To use it is not just to use some other vocabulary word, but is to equate them with the condition of African American or African slaves laboring in the American South. I wonder what they would think of the use of the word slave. The 1830s and 1840s, as we have seen, have been times of rapid industrial growth and rapid commercial expansion. With that comes immigration. Whenever there are opportunities in one place, it tends to draw people from other parts of the world where there are no such opportunities, or where those opportunities are limited. So we're going to look at the two major immigrant groups, the Irish and the Germans, and see how they fared in America. So you can see the Irish, 38.6%, and the Germans at just over 30% are going to be your two largest group of immigrants. Great Britain is, of course, going to be another large one. We are an English-speaking country. But the Germans and the Irish are going to be the largest immigrant group. So we'll start with the Germans. The Germans are going to be fleeing political persecution in what is then the Holy Roman Empire. There is no unified Germany just yet. They're coming from places such as Prussia, in which liberal revolutions, democratic revolutions, revolutions led by wealthy, middle-class, laissez-faire oriented people, where those revolutions have been put down by more conservative, monarchist, aristocratic folks. Now, a lot of your well-to-do Germans are going to say, well, we've had enough of that. Let's get on a boat and go to liberal, capitalist, and Republican America, where our political ideologies are better suited. And so they're going to end up in places like Michigan and Wisconsin and Illinois. There's a lot of German immigrants up there. There will be also German immigrants to Texas as well. We should point that out. But the bulk of them are going to end up in the Midwest. And they're relatively prosperous because they bring with them, first of all, money. Like I said, these are the well-to-do middle class. And they're going to be able to purchase land, and they're going to be able to settle it. It helps when you've got a little startup capital. Also, they've got some democratic ideals coming with them. Like I said, they're liberals in the 19th century sense. They're looking for a republican form of government. They are not looking for aristocracy, and they're not looking for monarchy. The other thing the Germans have going for them is they are by large, not always, but by large, Protestant. Many of them are going to be Lutherans, and so they're going to fit in well with a Protestant-oriented nation. So the Germans are going to be a success story initially. The Germans are going to fit in, and they're going to assimilate. Now, the Irish. The Irish are going to come in large numbers in the 1830s, and then a whole lot in the 1840s as well. Now, what is forcing the Irish out is not political revolution, but a potato famine. You've got a blight, which is a germ that has infected the Irish potato crop and has turned the main staple of their subsistence into a mushy mess. And it causes starvation, and they're going to need to get out. So the Irish are coming from areas of famine, and they're coming with very little money, and they're coming with very little skills, and they're not going to have the startup capital to do what the Germans did. And so they're not going to head off to Michigan or Wisconsin to purchase land and start a sprawling farm. They're going to congregate in cities, in places like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. And they're not going to be as prosperous. And there's going to be a lot of discrimination against them for several reasons. One, the English have traditionally discriminated against the Irish. And secondly, the Irish are largely, not always, but largely Catholic. And we have said this before, America still harbors some very strong anti-Catholic sentiment. Look at this document from a German immigrant. A lot of people come over here who were well off in Germany. There you go. But they were enticed to leave their fatherland by boastful and impudent letters from America. Their friends or children thought they could come be rich in America. This deceives a lot of people, since what can they do here? If they stay in the city, they can only earn their bread at hard and unaccustomed labor. If they want to live in the country and don't have a lot of money to buy a piece of land that is cleared and has a house, then they have to settle in the wild bush and have to work very hard to clear the trees out of the way so they can sow and plant. But people who are healthy, strong, and hardworking do pretty well. So, there's a German immigrant in Cincinnati. This is 1847. I think you can see that she is quite optimistic. She seems to have a good sense of reality. No, you're not just going to come here and the streets will be paved with gold. But look, there is opportunity. People who are healthy, strong, and hardworking will do well. She's pretty realistic. Now, the Irish, as we said, are going to have it a little bit different. There you have two potatoes, one that's normal and then one has been affected by the potato blight. So if you look at the chart, if you look at the graph there, where is the largest number of immigrants concentrated? They're right there at the height of the blight. They are trying to get out of Ireland and go anywhere else. Sometimes we think they all went to America. They didn't. They went all over the world, but a large number of them did go to America. So some more statistics are for you right there. Look at the German revolutions, 1848, 1849, and you see a peak in immigration there. Again, those were liberal revolutions. These are 19th century liberals who tend to be well-to-do, they tend to be middle class, and they want to get out of an area that is aristocratic and conservative and repressive. The Irish, on the other hand, are not seeking their political fortune so much as they're seeking something to eat. And the Great Hunger of 1845 to around 52 is going to be what's driving the Irish into America. Now, the other side of immigration is something called nativism. Nativism is a tough-to-define concept, but essentially nativists tend to be skeptical of people who were not born in the United States. They tend to be more conservative, more reactionary, and they tend to look down their noses at the newcomers who they see as ruining everything. Okay, no, this is not a real newspaper. This is just something I made up to dramatize what a lot of them think. The quote is real, however, though. The quote was put together by a group called the Know Nothing Party, and they probably got their name because they were something of a secret society. You ask them, what do you believe? And they say, well, I don't know anything. But the Know Nothing Party was an anti-immigrant or nativist organization, a political party. And let's look what they say. Americans must rule America, and to this end, native-born citizens should be selected for all state, federal, or municipal offices of government employment, in preference to naturalized citizens. So they believe that there's something special about having been born here. Naturalized citizens means, well, you could come over here and become a citizen. And the Know-Nothings are skeptical of that. They don't think that that's somehow a real American. You must have been born here. You must be native. And so look at this picture of the Irish. This is a depiction of the Irish, and it's not a very favorable one. As you can see, this poor guy is sitting on a wash bin, and his house is falling apart, and there's this goat walking in the background, symbol of rustic bucolic, and then there's a bottle on the floor, right? Not a very good image of the Irish in this political cartoon. Another one, as we said, the Irish have always been looked upon as something of a separate race, and that does not seem to sit well with us today. Notions of racism being applied to the Irish, and you say, wait, the Irish are white. Yeah, true, but not always. What, you say? That's right. The Irish were not always considered to be white. They were looked at as something of a sub-white species. And here you have a contrasting Florence Nightingale. She's very Anglo-looking. She's very put together. And then you have the Bridget McBruiser next to her, which is a stereotypical non-truthful depiction of the Irish. And as you can see, they're being depicted as something subhuman. And here you have a direct comparison being made between the Irish of the north and the African American to the south, and neither one of these two groups is depicted in a very favorable light. So you can see the Irish are being equated with black people, and to an average reader of the mid-19th century, this would not be a favorable comparison. An interesting point, when Irish people and black people were accused of crimes and convicted and sent to jail, the jails were segregated. They would put white people in one parts of the jails, and they would put Irish people and black people in another part of the jail, suggesting that they see them as similar. And to us, this makes little, I mean, the whole idea of segregation, I hope, makes very little sense to us today, but grouping the Irish with the Americans, or with the Irish with the African Americans, does seem a little bit odd, but this tells you something about how these two groups were seen. Sometimes black people were referred to as smoked Irish. I know that's not a very pleasant thing to think about. And sometimes Irish people were referred to as the niggers of Europe. And again, these are not pleasant things to think about or to repeat, but they do demonstrate historical reality. So the Know Nothing Party, the Nativists Party, these folks, they started to become very political. And the message of this poster is very clear. If you're a native-born American, arouse, get up, stand up, and protect your what? Your jobs. Shall American labor be protected against foreign competition in the home labor market? Always, always, always. The nativists tend to believe that the foreigners are coming to compete with Americans for jobs. At this point, we need to talk about the uglier side of immigration, and certainly the uglier side of nativism, as if nativism really has a bright side. It's called the Pennsylvania Bible riots, and we will get into that by looking at popular conceptions of Catholicism in America. We'll start by looking at the writings of somebody called the Reverend Lyman Beecher. The Reverend Lyman Beecher is from a long line of Calvinist-oriented preachers in the United States. His family line has produced such people such as Harriet Beecher Stowe of Uncle Tom's Cabin. In 1835, he wrote a plea for the West. He means the Western Hemisphere. He means the United States. He's speaking of Roman Catholicism when he writes, "They come. Also, not undirected. There is evidently superstition abroad." This is how Americans look at Catholicism. Many Americans look at Catholicism. And one here, by which they come and set down together in city or country as a Catholic body, and are led or followed quickly by a Catholic priesthood, who maintain over them in the land of strangers and unknown tongues an absolute ascendancy. Lyman Beecher is warning that the Catholics are coming, and they are going to set up their despotism. He writes on, "Catholicism is a religion which never prospered, but in alliance with despotic governments, has always been and still is the inflexible enemy of liberty and conscience and free inquiry, and at this moment is the mainstay of the battle against republican institutions." He believes, as many Americans believed in the 19th century, that republicanism, freedom, and democracy could not coexist with Catholicism. Catholicism is hierarchical. Catholicism is bound by tradition. Catholicism in its orientation is non-democratic. And to some extent, this is true of Catholicism on the continent. Catholicism goes through a few reinventions. Certainly Vatican II made Catholicism more compatible with what many Americans thought of Americanism. But at this point, it is understood by the vast majority of Protestants in America that Catholicism and Americanism cannot coexist. They are antithetical. And as you can see from this political cartoon, people fear that the Catholic Church is casting its shadow in the public schools, because one of the things that the Catholics begin to object to is public Bible reading and public prayer. And that's not because the Catholics object to the Bible, and that's not because Catholics object to prayer. What they object to is being subjected to Protestant Bibles and Protestant prayers. And so the adverse of that is you see a lot of Americans beginning to fear that the shadow of the Catholic Church is going to invade the public schools, and by there invade the United States and become Republican institutions. This cartoon is clearly not favorable to the Catholic Church, and it depicts the Catholic priesthood as being beset by lust and they're dragging these young girls by chains into the convent, into the nunnery, and there they will be corrupted. Of course, none of this is true, but this is the fears that many Protestant Americans fear about the Catholic Church. It says, batter down the convent doors of Catholicism, and the civilized world will stand amazed. So there's this save the virtue sort of thing going on. This political cartoon I find very interesting because it is put out by the emergent, by the nascent, by the not quite super popular Republican Party in the 1850s. Now, they're going to run their first candidate for a presidency in 1856 and not win. But the Republican Party is one of these groups that is coalescing around slavery and their opposition to the spread of slavery. But they have other issues as well. Have a look at what they are saying. Look, these two beastly things, this crocodile and this, I guess, turtle-looking thing is crawling up the State House, and it's crawling toward American liberty. It says religious liberty is guaranteed, but can we allow foreign reptiles to crawl over us? The foreign reptile to the left is, of course, the Roman Catholic Church, which is seen as a threat to American liberty. And then I think it's interesting, if you look to the right, who's crawling up on the side of the right? That's the Mormon Church. A lot of Republicans believe that Mormonism was also a major threat to liberty, and one of the chief objections there was Mormon polygamy. They really objected to the taking of more than one wife, which at this time the Mormon Church practiced. Now, that's interesting because Mormonism is not a foreign invention. Mormonism had its start in the Americas during the Second Great Awakening with Joseph Smith and then with Brigham Young. But it's being cast into the same category as Roman Catholicism, being both are, according to this cartoon, threats to liberty. And so in 1844, the incident that is going to stand out as perhaps the most violent expression of intolerance that we've had in this decade erupts in Pennsylvania. Bishop Kensington, he's the Catholic Bishop of Kensington, is going to voice his objection to the use of the King James Bible in public schools. And he asks for Catholic students to be exempt from readings of the King James Bible. As you may or may not know, the King James Bible was authorized by the Anglican Church in 1611 and has been a staple of Protestantism ever since. Today, you know, people use the NIV or the New Revised Standard, but the Roman Catholic Church then and now does not approve of the King James Bible as an authorized version of the Bible, and so Bishop Kensington asks for Catholic students in public schools to be exempt from this reading. Now, the Catholic School Board says yes, Catholic children can be exempt, and I don't know what that means. They go stand in the hall, or I'm not sure. But he says they are exempt from this. But then they place an addendum to this decision that says that the Catholic version of the Bible is still banned. Now, the Catholic version of the Bible is, of course, still in Latin. Not till Vatican II is the liturgy and the Bible going to be officially approved in English. But they put this there's sort of this warning, like a shot across the bow. Yeah, you can get out of the room, but the Catholic Bible is still banned. So Catholics organize into a Save the Bible campaign. The Catholics of Pennsylvania organize into a Save a Bible campaign. And in response to this, some of the Protestants of Pennsylvania organize into a similar Save the Bible campaign. Now, both are talking past each other. Both are trying to assert that the Bible is being banned from public schools, when in fact it's the Catholic Bible that's being banned, and the Protestants really, I think, are becoming too defensive over a battle that they're winning, essentially. The North American Philadelphia newspaper comments on the issue. It says, for years and years, the schools have been in operation, planned by Protestants and almost wholly supported by Protestants. And now come the Bishop of New York and the Bishop of Philadelphia, he means Kensington, to interfere in the management of them, creating confusion within their walls and excitement without it. Now, The North Americans' position is, look, Protestants have always run the schools, and Protestants should continue to run the schools. Now, what I ask you is, does the editor have a point here? This is something that I think we deal with today, and I raise the question not to advocate for one position or the other, but to simply raise the question. Can outsiders come in? Can newcomers come in? And Catholic Irish are relative newcomers to the scene. Can they come in and change things? Can we come in, and can newcomers come in and say, our needs must be accommodated? Because are we dealing with that in the public schools right now? Yes, we are always going to be dealing with these issues. Modern parallels, I think there are, right? We are having to accommodate large numbers of Muslim students. We are having to accommodate secularism. We are having to accommodate a lot of changing situations. And again, I'm not advocating for this or for that. I'm just saying that these are things that the diverse American Republic are always having to deal with. Well, in June of 1844, a group of nativists gather in an Irish Catholic neighborhood to denounce the supposed ban on the Bible. Now, like I said, the Irish Catholics never wanted to ban the Bible, but this is how a lot of Protestants are interpreting this. And of course, you're getting together in an Irish Catholic neighborhood, and you're making a big scene, and a riot is going to ensue. It lasts off and on for weeks. You're going to have various starts and stops to this. Lots of property and people are going to be hurt in this. Over 20 people are going to be killed and 100 are wounded. And the Protestant cause, the Protestants are going to make a really big deal. The nativists are going to make a really big deal over their first martyr, their supposed martyr. And there you have the first guy dying in this picture, the first guy who dies in these riots. And you have the Protestants looking on and shaking their fists at the Catholics, and this guy dying in the American flag there. It's not going to be the last time we're going to use the American flag as a symbol of our own sense of righteousness. Well, there he is. Have him framed there. You can get a better look at him. This is a sort of in a way, a Protestant saint, somebody who's dying for the cause, a martyr from their perspective. And what happens is the larger Protestant majority takes to the offensive, and they burn several Catholic establishments, including St. Augustine's School. They burn St. Michael's Church on, as you see, Wednesday afternoon. And when it's all said and done, when the police are able to put it down, people reflect on this. One diary says, the mayor, who acts with vigor and firmness, ordered out these troops, who are now on duty with loaded arms. These measures have restored order for the present, but I fear the elements of disorder are at work. The bands of Irish and other foreigners, instigated by the mischievous counsels of the trades union and other combinations of discontented men, are acquiring strength and importance, which ere long will be difficult to quell. So, according to this document, who's responsible for the riots? It's the, quote, bands of Irish and other foreigners. And I think it's interesting that this observer points out trade unions, unionists, people who want to organized labor is starting to show up here. So there's a political and a religious and even an economic dimension to these riots.